It's Alex Howard here from the Web 2.0 Summit. This year we've got something a little bit different. We're putting a lot more policymakers in the chair. One of them is with me. He's the senior senator from Oregon, Ron Wyden. How are you, sir?
Got to keep the senior senator in perspective. At one point, Fritz Hollings of South Carolina was the state's junior senator at the age of 80. So with all the young participants in this conference, I just want to make sure this age thing is in perspective.
It's relative, put it that way. So the thing that many people at this conference, and certainly in the larger world, internet users, may be more concerned about is this question of how the internet will be regulated. And one of the ways that that's been evolving is through something called the Protect IP Act, which has been proposed in Washington. Can you describe what the act is and what your stance is on it?
I'm very much opposed to the Protect IP Act because essentially what this is all about is the arbitrary seizure of domains. If you were to describe it in a sentence, you would say they're essentially all of these very vague standards that would let the government, and it would also allow for private rights of action. In effect, you'd cede part of the authority over the internet to private corporations to, in effect, pull down these domains. They're not going to be able to do it literally. They're going to sprout up other places, and it's going to, in my view, harm innovation. And that is why I've been so interested in this. If you look at the net, and this goes back to the days I was kidding about being the senior senator. When I came to the United States Senate, in terms of public policy, the internet was something nobody knew much about, and we essentially had very little understanding what the issues are. But what it comes down to is whether or not you're going to have policies that chill freedom and chill innovation, and certainly passing the IP Act would do that. And that's why I put a hold on the bill to formally block it.
And what that means essentially is that it's going to have to get a lot more support before it moves to the floor. Is that the way to think about it?
The supporters of the Protect IP Act, and I think it's really a misnomer in a kind of classic sense. I'd probably call it the anti-innovation and undermining freedom act. If somebody asked me what I really thought about, they can bring it to the floor, but I'll have a chance to essentially, under the rules of the Senate, to walk the country through what's at stake. I'll be able to point out, for example, why so many experts in the architecture of the internet are opposed to this. And they've made a very good case that some of what is going to be done under the Protect IP Act would actually hinder cybersecurity, because some of the approaches would in effect mimic tactics that hackers use to get into domains. So you've got VCs opposed to this, you've got engineers opposed to it, and certainly anybody who cares about the First Amendment ought to make sure they look at this bill, and I think they'll share my concerns.
And to put it in perspective, so for people who are following the issue, this is a group of engineers who work on the domain name system, DNS, and have been working on a protocol called DNSSEC, right? So trying to let an organization that's certifying that someone really is who they say they are when they're requesting a web page. And from what I gather, a fairly large and distinguished group of engineers have said that this would be a fundamental issue, as you say. On the other side of the issue, you have the content creation industry, the MPAA, the RAA, the various constituencies that are concerned about the piracy issue online. There are some aspects of the Act that deal with advertising and money that organizations like the Center for Democracy and Technology have not raised as many concerns about. Do you think it's possible that the problematic part of the bill could be broken out? Or is it really going to be as is or not?
If you eliminated the private right of action, as I say, which in my view just cedes authority over the internet to private corporations, I think you'd have to considerably narrow the definition of what's allowed. But at the end of the day, people need to understand what's the policy question here, and that is essentially, government is being used. One part of the American economy, the content sector, and particularly Hollywood, movies, and music, and the like, the record labels, they're essentially using government as a club to beat up another important part of the economy, and that's the innovation side, the folks who are here at Web 2.0 and care about the web. I think that's a big mistake, and particularly because I think the toll will be so great in terms of the future of innovation. The internet, in my view, and I chair the trade subcommittee of the Senate Finance Committee, is the shipping lane of the 21st century. This is how societies are going to organize. This is how commerce is going to be conducted. So much of the innovative work in terms of the economy and social media and a variety of others is coming from small firms. And I just don't want to see them stepped on this way.
So in terms of this space, you track a number of tech issues closely in your role. Where does online privacy regulation come in? I know that there's been a number of efforts over the past couple of congressional terms to try to address this, but no bill has actually moved forward and gotten passed.
Privacy law today is essentially a quarter century old. I'm going to say the conference, in a little bit. Privacy law is older than my key technology staffers. I mean, it just defies kind of common sense that we haven't come up with some rules of the road. And particularly now, what you're talking about is data. Data is being aggregated, data is being commoditized, and it seems to me when all of this is being sold and to some extent without people even knowing about it. I mean, if you look back at the history of some of this, years ago, and probably some of those who are following this whole discussion won't even remember cookies, which were being used to sort of track what was going on. People heard about that and they were furious. And I think people would be angry if they really understood what is being done with their data. And I think the rules of the road have got to focus on giving people more control over their own data. Several years ago, it came to be a discussion of sort of what was called opting out or opting in. And I think to some extent even that has kind of blurred. We've got to give owners of their own data more control. We need some rules of the road.
So to extend the conversation then to personal data ownership, is that something you anticipate being part of legislation at any point?
Very much so. I mean, it is a fundamental privacy issue. Congressman Jason Chaffetz and I have introduced a piece of legislation dealing with geolocation, because the fact of the matter is cell phones are being used to track people. And there's also been some questions in California here, where we're here for this meeting, with respect to Jerry Brown and privacy with respect to smartphones and the like. I think in the area of our legislation, apropos of the rules of the road, we ought to say that the police ought to have to get a warrant, except for limited kind of circumstances, if they're going to track you on your mobile phone.
So last question, and this is kind of a tough one. We're talking a little bit about the rights that private companies might try to assert in terms of getting pirated content taken down. One of the actions we're seeing, though, is from ICE taking down domain names. And certainly we're seeing massive amounts of law enforcement requests to social media companies to get data back from them. We've seen that happen to telecom companies, where they've gotten location data coming from them. It seems like part of the conversation should definitely include government being able to access our data or not. Do you anticipate there being an update to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the 25th anniversary of which is coming up later this week, and to there being serious consideration around what the rights of citizens are around privacy with respect to government in the digital age? Absolutely, and already in the United States Senate, there are bills that deal with essentially, government, and there are bills that deal with the private sector. But I think you need to do both, and that's why this legislation I have with Congressman Jason Chaffetz is so important, because we seek to lay out that both of these interests are important, and you're not going to get the privacy issues right. And certainly if you ask people with respect to their own personal privacy about tracking them with their cell phone, where we got
hundreds of millions of people with cell phones in the United States. They call that about as stark a privacy right as you could get. You can't come up with sensible rules of the road unless you do both the public side, government, and the private side, the data that the companies, the cell phone companies and others have that they're being asked to turn over. You can't get it right unless you do both sides of the ledger, and I hope people who are following this debate will go online at Congressman Chaffetz's website. He, by the way, is a conservative Republican. I'm a Democrat in the United States Senate. It's the only bipartisan bill that looks at both government and the private sector as it relates to the issue you're talking about, privacy.
Okay, well, Senator Wyden, thank you so much for joining us here today. I gather you'll be headed over to the live stream and the conference soon. For people who are interested in getting more information about this, you can Google the Protect IP Act. You can follow the Senator at Ron Wyden, and it's worth getting educated about this issue. Thanks again.